1 o'clock, so we'll get started, and as folks come in, they'll join us. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar, Tips from Youth Leaders on Engaging Communities Beyond COVID. This webinar is co-presented by the Ontario Trillium Foundation and the Ontario Nonprofit Network as part of our continued partnership. My name is Kavita. I am the Communications and Development Manager here at ONN. If you're new to ONN, welcome. We are the provincial network for Ontario's 58,000 nonprofits and charities focused on policy, advocacy, and services to strengthen Ontario's nonprofit sector as a key pillar of our society and economy. If you are already a member of ONN, welcome back, and thank you for your support. Our public policy research and advocacy work would not be possible without you. If you experience any technical difficulties, I know 2 years in, we're all sort of used to being online, but however, if you do experience anything, let us know in the chat box and our team will respond as soon as possible. We encourage you to ask questions and share comments through the chat box. Our team is monitoring it. You're also welcome to share comments and learnings on social media. To answer our most common question, you will receive an email with the recording of this webinar and resources in 1 week. So to ground our webinar today, I want to begin with acknowledging that we are meeting on unceded and unsurrendered land that has been uninhabited by Indigenous peoples from time immemorial. The ONN office is located on the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. This territory is part of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty and is also covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. At ONN, we believe that as nonprofits, we must take seriously our role in responding to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action. For ONN, this means embedding into our policy files and advocacy work concrete ways to move forward the calls to action and promote the self-determination and well-being of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. As a treaty person, I recognize that our sector is built on and benefits from colonialism and white supremacy. For me personally, I'm committed to learning the different ways in which I can support and amplify the calls for land back, reparations, and justice. It was World Water Day yesterday, so I'm still thinking deeply about how I have access to clean water every day, but there are many Indigenous communities who are denied this basic human right in Canada because their water has been poisoned. The right to water entitles everyone to have access to sufficient, safe, acceptable, physically accessible, and affordable water for personal and domestic use. There's an Indigenous community in Ontario who has spent 27 years on a long-term drinking water advisory. ONN encourages your organizations to read the 94 calls to action and determine other ways to support Indigenous communities that you will be accountable for. Now I'd like to introduce our panel moderator, Muna Mohammed. She is an equity-based facilitator, convening and mobilizing on the territory of the Algonquin Nation, now known as Ottawa. She's the lead of capacity building at the Youth Opportunities Fund at Ontario Trillium Foundation and is passionate about grassroots social change, Black Indigenous solidarity building, anti-oppressive education, and youth engagement. Over to you, Muna.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Kavita. I'm really excited to be here sharing space with three really remarkable grassroots leaders that the YOF is grateful and honored to be able to support. Before I take a moment to introduce them and before we jump into the panel, I do want to just take a moment to talk about who we are at the YOF, what we do. So the YOF, the Youth Opportunities Fund, is a program of the Government of Ontario administered by Ontario Trillium Foundation. We invest through grants and capacity building supports into the work of grassroots groups and leaders and systems change leaders that are committed to improving the well-being of youth and families. There are a lot of key aspects to the design of the YOF program. I just want to shout out maybe 2 aspects that I think are really integral and important to the design of the YOF and to the success of the YOF. So we're an outcome-based grant maker. The grants we fund or the groups we support and the work we support all lead to a specific outcome in the area of well-being, ranging from supporting youth transition into sustainable career pathways, supporting parents and guardians and caregivers navigate and influence systems that impact their well-being, and creating safe spaces for Black and Indigenous youth to build strong community and cultural connections, and many more. We also prioritize in investing in Black and Indigenous communities through an understanding and backed by data that these communities experience persistent and systemic barriers to wellness and wellness access. Today, we get the opportunity to share space and hear from 3 grassroots leaders who were funded through our Youth Innovation Stream, a funding stream for grassroots groups that are designing and delivering work that is led by youth and for youth. I'm going to take a moment to introduce our panelists for today. I just want to name that many of their work, all of their work and commitment to their communities has existed before their access to the YOF grant and will exist hopefully for years after. So to just name that YOF is only a part of the story, that their work is much bigger than that. And I really hope that that comes through in this conversation. So I'll start by introducing Aisha. So Aisha is the founder of the Power to Girls Foundation. The Power to Girls Foundation is a nonprofit organization that supports and empowers Black and marginalized girls in the Greater Toronto Area and Ghana. They are dedicated to providing mentorship programs, community interaction, and recreational activities that inspire self-confidence, build self-esteem, friendships, nutritional health, and integrity in the hearts of all of their girls. The foundation helps young girls discover their individual identity and creative gifts by developing qualities that will help them become leaders. Power to Girls Foundation makes learning about life challenges a fun, informative, and fulfilling experience for the girls involved. Welcome, Aisha. I'll now introduce Kyla. So Kyla is the founder and program manager of Georgian Bay Anishinaabeg Youth, GBay for short. The Georgian Bay Anishinaabeg Youth is an Indigenous youth-led initiative in partnership with Georgian Bay Biosphere. GBay works to support Indigenous youth along the rivers and eastern shore of Minidogami, which is Georgian Bay. GBay is located in Parry Sound, Ontario, within the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850. Anishinaabe Ininiimowan, also known as Thought and Philosophy, loosely translated to Thought and Philosophy, is the foundation of GBay. Their projects and programming are connected to Anishinaabe Adziwin, cultural land-based learning. The goal of GBay is to create safe spaces for Indigenous youth to build strong community and cultural connections. The multitude of projects, programming, and partnerships of the initiative are examples of Indigenous innovation. Welcome, Kyla. And our final panelist is Monica. So Monica is the founder and executive director of Black Women in Motion. Black Women in Motion is a Toronto-based, survivor-led grassroots organization that empowers and supports the advancement of Black women, girls, non-binary, and gender non-conforming survivors of gender-based violence. They work with an anti-racist, intersectional feminist, trauma-informed, and survivor-centered framework to create culturally relevant resources, healing spaces, educational, and economic opportunities for survivors. So just a grand welcome to all 3 of our panelists. I've shared a little bit about the kind of work that the 3 of you do. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about is that connection to an engagement of community and your youth beneficiaries during the pandemic and outside of the pandemic as well. So I want to just start by asking you, if you can share in your words, what community needs or issues your work is responding to. And as your work kind of adapted to an online space, how are the needs of the young people that you were working with changing as your work was adapting to that online space and as COVID became a reality for the folks that you were working with? I'll start with Kyla, maybe. Do you want to share?
Yeah, a lot of our work has drastically changed. So to sort of anchor in a little bit more of the context of our work as GBay, we're located in Parry Sound, Ontario. I believe we have about just under 7,000 year-round permanent residents. And so we are a very small, relatively rural organization with youth who participate in our programming and our organization. So understanding that we come from a rural context is really imperative to the way that we approach our work in light of responding to the pandemic. And to be quite honest, the pandemic has exacerbated the needs for young people to have access to equitable services and to really remind community, families, and organizations such as ourselves as GBAY that our basic needs have to be met, and we have to be able to support youth participation, however the youth may define it. So for us, it looks like shifting and adjusting the work that we do. Though a lot of programs have shifted towards an online component, that's not feasible entirely for the work that we do. Living in a rural and sometimes remote area, it's difficult to access internet safely. It is a privilege that many youth that we work with, and myself included, don't have access to. And so for us, accessibility is at the root and the core of what we do for GBAY. And so we're always navigating, how do we ensure that we are providing the supports necessary to youth to participate in the programs? But also at the same time, we're also prioritizing youth involvement in developing these programs. It's one thing to ensure that we're meeting a deliverable based on a funding agreement or an external contract. But the most important thing is ensuring that the youth have autonomy and can have a say in providing direction on what are the needs and how should we address those needs.
Thanks, Kyla. And I think it'll be neat to hear, I know we have a question later on about the kind of practices and approaches to connecting with youth, like how that actually applies to a rural context where there isn't that like dependability on the online space. So I'm interested to hear about that later. Monica, did you want to share a little bit about your work adapting to an online space and the needs of those that you're working with?
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Kyla, for sharing as well. 2020 was something. I think as an organization, we shifted from doing all of our work, in person, as tradition, Black communities love to gather in person, and that's how we stay connected for the most part. But having to shift all of our services and programs, to a virtual capacity, was definitely a transitional period for us as a team. And I feel like now we have a little bit more of an understanding as an organization how to do some of those pieces. But I think for us as a team, we've been really trying to take inventory and reconcile, the ableism that we see a lot of times when it comes to program and services design and delivery. Oftentimes, organizations like ourselves that are grassroots in nature have historically relied on governmental funding, grant funding, to sustain ourselves, and we've been able to diversify, our revenue streams. But with that becomes a lot of, added costs. Okay, so now shifting to a virtual capacity, there's Zoom subscriptions, there's, hiring maybe staff that specialize in technology and back-end tech, so to speak. So I think for us as a team, it was absolutely quite challenging. And then thinking about, our beneficiaries. Not everyone has access to emails. Not everyone has access to internet, to stable internet connections, to devices. I think as we move from 2022 and beyond, I think definitely we're going to probably sit in a hybrid model of service delivery, because that allows us to, do a better job of ensuring that everyone is, able to have the opportunity to experience our programs and services. But even the fact of, hey, so we're now doing the program on Zoom, but no one knows how to use Zoom. So, checking our assumptions around what folks, again, our ableism on, everyone should know, like everyone knows by now. We've been doing this for a year or 2 years. So that's definitely been a major learning for us as a team when it comes to pivoting. But I think, going back is the piece around building really authentic relationships with our beneficiaries, I think has allowed us to make the transition a little bit more easier in the online space, because there has always been a connection there and ongoing connections with the clients that we support. But COVID's been rough. It's been rough, but I think a lot of learnings when it comes to how to do this in a way that ensures that we are including everyone. So doing, virtual facilitations. Do we have closed captioning? Do we have interpretation supports? Are we providing options for folks to have the handouts and presentation decks in like alternative formats and languages as well? So, ensuring that no survivor is left behind has kind of been our beat as an organization. And now what does that mean when it comes to, delivering and connecting them to our work?
It sounds like there's like a part of it that's around the accessibility considerations that come with this. And, how folks have been telling us, like, we actually need online spaces to be able to engage, especially folks who are disability justice workers. And then there's also the aspect of it that's about building your internal capacity to now move all of your programming online. That is sometimes that like forgotten piece of the internal work that it takes as a small organization, right? Aisha, tell us a little bit about Power to Girls and what that movement online was like for you, and how the needs of your beneficiaries shifted.
Yeah, first off, thank you so much for having me and for creating the space for us to actually share. Aisha is the name. So honestly, everything that everyone has said earlier, like I echo the exact same sentiments. I think for us, our program is very relationship based. It's very heavy on like hands-on, on like, really creating that safe space for girls. So a lot of times, sometimes we'll go into program and, someone is feeling low and, with permission, everyone would like, come together, give that person a hug, so it was really a hard blow when, we had to sit with the reality that actually this is going to be like this for a couple of, well, at that time, we're hoping a couple of weeks, which turned into years. So now we do have to find ways to pivot. So personally, I've always thought about how technology and community work intersects. So that was always something that for me, like from an individual standpoint, I was always thinking about. So when the pandemic kind of like rolled over and it seemed like everything was going to be shifted online, my main focus was how can we duplicate that same experience virtually? And of course, that also came with, the issues of accessibility. And then like, some of the folks that we work with, they might have access to a computer, they might have access to internet, but there are multiple people in the household that actually have to use that exact same, laptop or access to internet. So it became very hard in terms of like, how then do you ensure that you're still providing support, you're still providing the help in a way that makes sense for our beneficiaries and in a way that makes sense for our girls. So just based off of like some of the things that we were hearing, because prior to the pandemic, what we had done was that we had actually signed up everyone that was that was part of our program on our own online platform. So it was a way of us, making sure that we had access to their contact information. We had access to their parents' contact information. So transitioning to that online module wasn't as difficult. But then I think what we were really focused on was how do we duplicate that same experience? So we ended up setting up a helpline and really allowing for the girls to contact us if they needed any support, if they just wanted to vent, if they wanted to talk to someone. And there was a lot of like trial and error when it came to programming specifically, because by I think by the 6th month, everyone was just tired of virtual. Everyone was just like zoomed out. It was just like you're on the call and it was like, yeah. So we actually ended up having to pivot again and then turn the module into a drop-in module. So then the girls come and they decide what we discuss that day. So they decide how the conversation is going to flow. They decide what exactly it is that they need. And we recognize that there was so much engagement there because now it's like they are in charge of the sessions. And actually from that program, 3 of our participants ended up starting a podcast as a result of some of those conversations. So For us, it wasn't as difficult in terms of like the transition. It was really, we were really focused on the relationship aspect of it. And then to also ensure that all the other areas that, you know, the girls were bringing up, like the access to the computers, access to internet and stuff like that, we were able to now find funding that would allow for us to be able to, if it's purchasing laptops that they can borrow, and all of those different things. Because sustainability is something that personally is always very, very important to me. And it's like, I think that has been my lifelong mission as someone that is in the sector, is how do we remain sustainable and how do we actually create that sustainability? And then as part of that, we were able to really scale our online platform as well to include access to mentors and access to people for the girls to speak to. So it was really all those different issues that everyone else was talking about was very much highlighted, and it was something that we also had to take account of. But I think because technology was always something that I was thinking about and how we integrate that, it wasn't as hard as it would have been if we were not prepared with that.
Mm-hmm. There is something that I think, I mean, you're all already dropping tips, which I think is like great. But I mean, like something about the formality of meeting online limits our ability to build those like authentic relationships, which I really think is what you're getting at, Aisha. So like there's something in the chat about like loving that idea of a hotline. And also the idea of drop-ins that really allow for the kind of emergence that happens when you meet in person, just in conversation with people, that I think so many of us have been craving, having been online for so long. So that's really beautiful. I would love to just transition into a conversation about what effective youth engagement looks like for you. So I know like a lot of folks in the audience, a lot of people who are tuning in are doing this community engagement work. And I think, you know, outside of the practices and approaches, or maybe a level higher, is some of the like pillars or lenses you take to the work that really anchor that kind of youth engagement work that you do. And so this first question around your engagement practices are, what are two pillars of strong and effective youth engagement that you've practiced, that you use, that are really foundational to how you do your engagement work? Whoever feels called to share first can unmute.
I can get started.
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay, cool. Honestly, I think I was going over this in my head, and I know the key pillars for me is empathy. As someone that, you know, I started Power to Girls based off of like my own personal experience as an immigrant in Canada. And as a young Black girl navigating Canada, navigating all of the spaces that you can possibly imagine, from the business aspect to the community aspect to the education aspects, like literally all of the different systems. And I think to effectively engage youth, you have to have empathy. If you do not care about this work, do not do it. And I'm going to share the reason why, because I find that a lot of times we think we know what's best for everyone else. But in reality, the youth know what's best for them, right? If you create a space that allows for them to be themselves, they're able to share things that you probably wouldn't have thought about in your wildest dreams, right? So I think the first thing is empathy. Of course, aside from like creating that safe space and creating that space that allows for people to fully be themselves, because think about it, as a young Black girl, what we're constantly talking about is how do we go into spaces that allows for us to bring our full selves? So why is it that when we are engaging youth, we feel like all of a sudden that is supposed to be different, and we are not supposed to apply that exact same urgency to them and to their needs? So first one is empathy. The second thing is that allowing youth to design and implement programs the way that benefits them. One of the things that we have done at Power to Girls is we actually ended up creating an ambassador program. And the ambassadors are the ones that they're like our mini advisory board. They are our youth advisory board. And literally, sometimes we can present programs to them and they'll be like, Aisha, I love you, but I will not participate in that. And I'm like, I have to respect that. because we are building for them. We are creating for them. So why is it that we have to, be in our little corner, create this program that to us is amazing, present it to them, and then we wonder why there's low engagement or there's low enrollment, because from the jump, they were not involved in that process. So for me, of course, there's so many more, and I'm really excited to hear what Kyla and Monica has to say about that. But I think empathy and really involving youth in the design and implementation process of any program that you do is imperative, not only from the organizational aspect, but then also from program aspects. The last thing that I'll share is that I think even from an organizational perspective, if we do want to build leadership and we do want to understand that, yes, I might be the founder of Power to Girls, but I'm not always going to be around. What does the next generation of Power to Girls look like? It doesn't look like me. It looks like the girls that are actively participating in our programs now. So how do I engage them in that process now so that, let's say, 10 years from now, they can go pursue higher education, come back and say, actually, you know what, Aisha, I'm ready to take this over because I know how it impacted me. So really engaging them in all aspects of the organization and not thinking that we're doing them a favor by just planning stuff and presenting it to them as well. So yeah, that's just all I wanted to say. Sorry, I promise I'm not angry. I'm just
Passionate. You're passionate.
Yes, go for it, Monica.
No angry labels here ever. I'm probably going to echo a lot of the things Aisha's already said. I think in regards to this question, I always think about community-informed and centered approach that always honors people's humanity and social locations. So for us at Black Women in Motion, ongoing engagement is critically important to the work that we do. We care a lot and value fostering genuine, reciprocal, and authentic relationships with our beneficiaries and the larger community. And that means always having multiple, touch points with folks. So it's not, the 12-week program or project or services, has ended and see you later. Aisha, spoke to this around the need for capacity building. I think having capacity building and skill development components in the work is critical so that, as Aisha mentioned, when I think about succession planning, I got 1.5 years left and I'm ready to pass the baton, and there are absolutely, a huge number of capable and competent folks who are ready to continue to lead the work. So I think that also, helps with buy-in, where it's like, okay, so I may have a particular lived experience, but now, there's an opportunity for me to be actually a part in the shaping of this particular organization and the work that they do. I don't know everything. I'm always a student of the world. But I think, there's a certain threshold that I've been able to take Black Women in Motion to, and I am fine with that, and I have served my purpose, and now I'm ready for the next person to come and continue on with the work. I think a huge part for me as well is that, and Aisha mentioned it, folks are experts of their own experiences. We need to really stop telling people what they need when they need it. We have to understand that community, that young people have a plethora of knowledge and wisdom that can be shared when it comes to community assets that exist, as well as community needs and gaps. And they can play absolutely a pivotal role in developing transformative solutions. We've seen this happen before that respond to those needs and gaps. And then when I go back to the piece around reconciling people, understanding and honoring people's humanity and social locations, I think the pandemic has really, offered us an opportunity to check ourselves, right? So we're overly reliant, and I'm not talking about just the not-for-profit sector, but for most, jobs, overly reliant on the emails. Okay, I can't reach you, so you're not interested, when we haven't even explored calling, texting, the hotline, WhatsApp, and other platforms to share information and engage young people, and also going into community, if it's safe to do so with all, protocols in place. But when I think about capitalism and the way that it has uniquely seeped into the not-for-profit and philanthropic sector, right? Like everyone's not online on the time, not everyone has access. So if you didn't get an email response from a young person in seconds, minutes, 24 to 48 hour, colonial standard, that doesn't mean that they're not interested. Like what is urgent or a priority for us is not urgent and a priority to others. And we always need to anchor ourselves in compassion and grace. And that's something I've been, deliberately trying to move my team away from in this hostile white supremacist, like everything is urgent, everything is on fire, and we need to do everything. And that plays a huge role. That organizational culture that you create within your organization, within your not-for-profit, plays a huge role in how you're now going to come and interact with young people. So if everything is a rush, if everything is mandatory, if everything is urgent, how do you think that's going to, impact your ability to foster genuine relationships, right? It's going to feel very much so disingenuous, and young people are absolutely smart and can pick up the BS. So I think, we need to reflect on, how we engage with each other, because it's colonial. We have a lot of learning and unlearning to do, and I'm still actively doing that as well. Yeah, I'm gonna stop there so that Kyla can have their space.
Yeah, go for it, Kyla.
Oh my goodness, awesome. Miigwech. Everything that has been shared, it resonates so deeply within me. When we started GBay in 2018, 2019, there was four of us, myself included, 4 young people who came together, literally sat in the local Starbucks in Parry Sound, because that's like one of 3 coffee shops we have here. And so we sat there and we were thinking, okay, like, what are we going to do? How are we going to do this? And at this point in time, like, early 2018, early 2019, no idea a pandemic would be very near in our future. And when we initially came together with the understanding that we are trying to develop a program to support young people. But at the same time, we're also those beneficiaries. We are part of every single parameter, every single piece of identity, every single piece of demographic of young people we wish to serve. And so how does that look? What is our role and our responsibility to those communities, to the communities we identify within, the communities that we belong to, and the communities that we're from? So for us, it was always, it's a foundational piece of our understanding that we have a sense of responsibility, but also a sense of shared leadership amongst GBay. We have a youth advisory circle similar to like a mini board, and we consider each other to be ambassadors of the program. And part of that is to prepare and to support each other with whatever type of needs that they may have. So whether it be educational or as young professionals or just young people trying to live in this world, like, in all honesty, like it's a network of young people supporting each other. And so this part of capacity building and shared leadership is a huge, I want to say it's a huge part of the way that we operate, but also the need for sustainability. And I kind of want to touch on a couple other things too, with respect to a comment I had said earlier. I am still a young person. I'm 25. I identify as an Anishinaabe and an Ojibwe woman. I oversee the program that we run, but I also said that lack of internet and accessibility to technology impacts me professionally and personally. So when we're designing programs, when we're designing projects, when we're trying to navigate what are our next steps as GBay, as an organization, as a group, we're always thinking, okay, this sounds like a great idea, but is it actually feasible for us as people who are either employed by the project, who are volunteers of the project, who are ambassadors of the project? Is this actually feasible for us? And if it's not, how are we going to ever expect participants, beneficiaries, clients to ever want to do this? And part of that motto that we have is to lead by example. And so when we started having those really tough conversations, like, okay, so the whole world is transitioning over to online, over to Zoom. What does that look like for us, in all honesty? Because as Anishinaabe, we have this inherent understanding that connecting with each other is quite foundational to our way of life as Anishinaabe people. And we can't gather, like, even now, like we're still at the point where so many of us have very, very close ties to vulnerable populations in our communities and our households where we don't feel comfortable yet gathering. And so this is where we started to think, like, okay, so maybe instead of having a program, like, we really wanted to have an activity, an event, a drop-in or something like once a month, that we've actually opted more towards self-led activities. And so providing participants with the opportunities to to provide us direction with what we should do, how we should do it. And for us, this also includes that piece of accessibility. And we've created a lending library. So whether it be iPads that young people need to use to access programs, whether there are programs or another program, but we've also created one where we encourage young people to get outside. And so it's outdoor gear and equipment, because that in itself is a whole other conversation about white supremacy, whiteness, colonization, and privilege. So for us, it's always thinking about how are we going to leave a good path for those young people who are coming up and watching us? How are we going to ensure that we are leaving them with the appropriate steps or the helpful tips, tricks, and hints on how to do this work?
Thank you, Kyla. I think that there's like almost this like really brilliant weaving that's already happening between the pillar level, or the like the foundational concepts or approaches, and the actual work you're doing. So like Aisha, you named empathy as one of your foundational pillars. And then Monica was speaking about an understanding that like what is urgent for us isn't urgent for everybody. And understanding that when people aren't responding to you right away, that doesn't mean they're not interested, and you need to diversify your modes of communication. That's like an empathetic response, right? To not getting a response back. There's this piece around, and I love how this was named, like honoring humanity and social location as like such a core aspect of a pillar that you actually do. And I think that like the hotline example, right, or the drop-in example is a way that you allow people to come as they are and take up the space that they need and then adapt from there. That's honoring people's capacity and social location, or that wasn't linked, humanity and social location. I would love to, and you've already shared a bit, but like some of those practices and approaches you've taken to both sustain that relationship, right? There's relationships with youth that you had pre-pandemic that you're sustaining, and then build relationships with young people who might be newer to your program, or do that kind of like outreach to young people who are newer to your program during the pandemic. And asking, you know, on top of some of the examples that you've shared, what are some of those practices and approaches that you've taken to sustaining and then building those new relationships? And maybe we'll start with Monica.
Not the one that rambles the most. So procuring their services. I love to see community folks, you know, take up space and getting compensated accordingly. So many of our programs and initiatives at Black Women in Motion have a capacity building or skill development piece. You know, so folks can take what they've learned, unlearned, relearned, and then share and apply that with community, with friends, family, etc. So when opportunities for engagement come up, right, we're a team of 11 people supporting 700 Black survivors across the GTA. Absolutely not sustainable. So there's opportunities that come up for facilitation, for consultancy work. And because we have done so much of that work with the young people coming into our spaces, we can then say, you know what, this person, this young person, we can vouch for them. We have worked with them in a particular capacity, and they are more than capable and competent to do this particular piece of work. Plus, would love to know what the compensation model is. I have absolutely no interest to ever send a young person to a partner community agency, cross-sector community agency that is not going to compensate them accordingly. Just because they're young people, I feel like there is this assumption of, you know, not as well seasoned, don't have like the wisdom and the knowledge, when in fact they do, and then they are subjected to a lot of exploitation of labor. So we need to do our part as organizations and leaders to advocate for that. So if the partner doesn't have the capacity to provide resources to compensate that young person for their time, I will without hesitation absorb the cost, because that's violence to me. Not young people with multiple intersections who experience a lot of harm from systems and institutions as is, now asking them to do something, sharing their knowledge, sharing their skills and expertise, and expecting that should be free because they are quote unquote young people. So that's one way that, you know, we've been able to build and sustain relationships with a lot of young people that have started with us since 2013 to now is, you know, they become a part of our facilitator and consultation roster. And then I think also about, you know, partnership development. So our resources as an organization, they can be stretched, and we may not always be able to provide the care and support that we want to for survivors in our network, but we have at least fostered relationships with other folks in the not-for-profit space, other businesses who are anchored in our frameworks of doing things, and have a sense of integrity when it comes to community development. Because just because you're making partnerships, it's like, yeah, we have a partnership with XYZ organization, but they have a white supremacist culture. There's absolutely no diversity, and we're not going to send a young person there to commit harm or to experience harm, pardon me. So I think the need to also take inventory of the type of partners that we have that are going to be supporting the young people that we refer is critically important, because I'm always trying to understand that the ways that Black Women in Motion does things, there's only a fraction of other Black and Indigenous led and serving organizations that do this work. And not every organization entity operates from that space. So I want to, of course, ensure young people are prepared to advocate for themselves, and to ensure that they don't experience harm or are exploited or taken advantage of, but that organizations are also starting to move the dial on how they do work. But for us as a team, we recognize we cannot do everything, nor should we, right? We want to move with what capacity and skill and expertise is at the table, which is why relationship building with other organizations and groups, corporations, et cetera, are so important, but they have to have similar value systems, point blank period, before, we refer young people that we care about, that we have been supporting over the years, because then that also is a part of that relationship that we have with that young person, and it being, maintained and sustained. So it's like, oh my God, I've worked with Black Women in Motion, and then they sent me to this place, this internship, this organization, and it was like wild out here, right? So I think there's an importance of us just making sure that we're doing our due diligence always in, who's at the table internally, but also the external partners that we have to really know them like the back of our hand, because we are the ones that are going to be providing those, those linkages for the young people that we work with directly. End of rambling.
Thank you, Monica. I wonder, Kyla, Aisha, if you wanted to build on that or add your own 2 cents on those practices and approaches.
Do you mind repeating the question for me again, please?
Yeah, sure. So it's what are some practices and approaches you've taken to both sustaining the relationship with young people who were in your programming kind of prior to COVID, and then building relationships with new sets of youth that would benefit from your work?
Okay, sounds good. Thank you for that. So for us, we've been very big on the relationship building aspect. And I think, one thing that I would say is that due to COVID, we also lost touch with a lot of, some of our beneficiaries, right? It also created an opportunity for us to be able to connect with more people and to connect with new people. So it is a mixture of both. But I think one of the key practice is creating a sense of ownership. And for me, that is really important. And again, I keep saying for me, because this is my perspective, right? I can bring my girls here and they would also share from their own perspective. But then personally, one of the things that has been very vital, and I think this is something that actually we all agree on as a team, is that how do we create a sense of ownership for everyone that comes through our programs? So then they don't feel like, oh, this is Aisha's thing, or this is Jessica's thing, or this is Annika's thing, but no, this is my thing. And with creating that sense of ownership, they are able to actually freely tell you, this doesn't work, we need to change it, right? And it's really around creating that space. And honestly, I absolutely love my girls, because we've been able to do that, where they can freely come to us and say, Charlie, this is not working out the way that we want it to. Or they'll say, and they have a way of using the things that we've taught them back at us. And that's always humbling, because they'll say, I think this sounds good from your perspective, but have you tried thinking or looking at it from this way? And I'm like, oh, that sounds like something I would say, So it's very important that we create that sense of ownership. And I think that is a principle that really has guided us throughout, the foundations of Power to Girls, because up to today, we have girls that have participated in our programs 5 years ago that still come back either as facilitators or mentors, or like even providing them with employment opportunities. And I think that's really what makes part of the work that we do so fulfilling, is the fact that we know that, yeah, maybe we have provided the skills, we've provided a safe space, but then we're also able to provide the economic empowerment, which is one aspect that when you're working with youth or when you're working with folks from disenfranchised communities, we don't talk about enough, right? Yes, they need empowerment, but they need money. So how are you creating the space, or how are you creating the opportunities that allows them to get access to that economic empowerment? Because majority of the issues that we're facing are also due to economic accessibility, right? So that is one key thing. The other thing too, and I think this is really around creating community, and how do you actually really sustain that community that you've created? So then that way, when new people come in, they don't feel left out and they don't feel othered, but then they feel like they are a part of that community. And it's really goes back to creating that sense of community, creating that sense of ownership. Because when a new person comes into our fold or into our community, I don't want to be the one to tell them what we do. I actually ask a participant, or I ask one of the girls, tell them what your own experience has been like, because no one listens to a youth better than another youth, right? Because it's like, oh, this is your thing, you're able to tell me, all the things that you've done, but I want to hear it from the person that's actually participated. So they're able to share that, and then before you know it, they've also created that sense of community, and they've created that sense of they have that sense of that common ground that they can all share from. So those are the two things that I would say really, is that create that sense of ownership, and then also creating community, but allowing folks to be themselves. Like, it really all goes back to, are you creating a space that allows for youth to share, to bring their full selves, and to be able to tell you when something is not working for them? And how quickly are you able to adjust and adapt when they share those grievances?
Thank you, Aisha. Kyla, I'm going to pass it to you, and also name that we have just under 5 minutes before question period. So Kyla, I'll pass it over to you to answer this question. And if we can get one more in, or just get a few thoughts on the next one, that would be solid. So Kyla, over to you.
Awesome, miigwech. Yeah, I'm definitely thinking about two different approaches that we're taking. We knew that when we were starting GBAY, it was going to be extremely difficult to support the beneficiaries, youth folks, young people, the way that we had initially hoped. Very optimistic, very hopeful, very enthusiastic, and living in a rural setting is extremely difficult. And I cannot emphasize this enough. And I've said this every single time I've had a chance to speak, but I cannot emphasize this enough. Accessibility is a huge, I don't always want to call it a barrier, but it definitely is. It's a systemic barrier that limits the way that we can do our work. So for us, we have always prepared for some type of transition and growth in our programming to shift from how we initially started. When we first began GBAY, we had just a small group of us four as sort of the advisory team, the advisory circle. And now we're at a point in time where the pandemic has really made it extremely clear that we have to adapt this and grow it more. That young people who were involved in our programming before, their involvement has changed and shifted, just as we've adapted to the pandemic as well. And so creating this new sort of two different options for young people to be involved in program development and decision making for the work that we do is honestly, it's become so clear. The youth have named this, they've said this on several occasions, like, we want to be involved. And then on the other hand, there are people who are involved in our programs and a part of our advisory team who say, I want to be involved, but at a limited capacity. And so we thought, like, hey, this is perfect. All right, they are telling us explicitly how they want to be involved, what that will look like. And now for us, it's like, okay, we're preparing for this transition to happen. We are in the works of doing this. And so we're meeting youth and where they're at, and they're telling us how they want to be involved. They're telling us the parameters of their engagement, and we couldn't ask for anything any better. Like, this is so clear, this is so concise and very specific. And then the other part is, alongside that, is that we've focused a lot more on internal capacity building internally as a staff team. We've grown as a staff team. We've had a lot of really unique opportunities where now we have 4 staff who are part of our team that initially started as a volunteer, as an advisory member for GBAY in the very beginning. So all of us at some point and some point in our lives, we have evolved and grown into wanting to become of the project in this administrative position. And so this shared leadership is quite imperative to the continuation of our work. I'm gonna leave it at that.
Thank you, Kyla. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's actually something great about that what you named about meeting youth where they're at, especially when you see organizations like turn away, you know, young people because they don't have the capacity to engage in the way that the organization wants them to. So the responsibility for you to find the room for them to engage within their own capacity, like, really resonated there. Thank you. Thanks so much for, you know, all of your contributions to this conversation. I know we didn't get through all of our questions, but I really feel like you spoke to kind of all aspects of what we wanted to touch on. I'm gonna see, Kavita, if we can move into a question period with our panelists.
Thank you to our panel. I'll leave you all spotlighted and just field you some questions, but I believe one of the questions was sort of initially, and if I don't do your question justice, please feel free to unmute. But they were expressing that they've experienced great challenges for a number of years as young people seem to, you know, have obligations like school and work, and so it's hard for them to engage in the programming. So how do you, you know, within your own respective organizations, how do you address this? You know, what tips can you give if there seems to be a high dropout rate? And just, I think overall, some engagement tips for activities that are organized for young people.
I can go. And I'm saying this as I'm still like thinking and connecting dots. I feel like dropout rates, low engagement rates there's no one response or one solution to that particular problem. I feel like I would look at it at, you know, at multiple levels. So impact, what has been the historical impact of the program? Representation. Right? So a lot of Black and Indigenous young people are navigating systems, including not-for-profits, and there's a culture of mistrust, right? So does the organization even reflect the diversity of the clients it's currently serving? So if we start there, you know, that can be a great starting point when it comes to, you know, work that we have to do internally, structurally. I think of organizational culture. So am I going to go to an organization that has a history of being queer, trans, homophobic, that's been anti-Black in, you know, the way that it delivers services, engages with young people? I'm thinking about the usage of language, right? So how progressive, how up to date is this particular organization? I feel like a lot of not-for-profits are like, you know, things are the way they have always been, and there is no transformation. There's no learning and unlearning and relearning in terms of models of youth engagement. I'm also thinking about moving away from like carceral forms of punishment. So if a young person drops out, that doesn't mean that we dash them away or we never engage them again. I think we have to reframe our mind around the concept of transition and shifts. We're always in constant transition and shifting. So young people are absolutely included, and that is normal. So if someone, it was in our program 1, 2, 3, however many weeks, and they have decided to, you know, remove themselves from that space, they're honoring their priorities and their capacity. And I would never be mad at that, right? So we have to understand that when we are, you know, providing a program or service, that the hope is whoever is in most need of it are the ones that are going to show up. And then also like revisiting the program or service itself, like, is this even responding to community needs right now? So if we're constantly doing a program from 12 to 3 when folks are in school and don't have the capacity to attend, then we may want to look at actually how the program is currently being delivered and what young people are saying. So then it goes back to, we need to be, you know, listening twice and speaking once. And I'm gonna keep it short.
Facts on facts on facts. She said that I think it's really imperative that people that do drop off, depending on, because people don't just drop out of programs, right? And I think like Monica mentioned all of like the reasons. And I think it's also around like, are you actually engaging them throughout that process? Like, are you still checking in? Oh, my internet connection is unstable. Are you still checking in on them? Are you still, you know, are you trying to find ways as to why, you know, maybe I think really like that communication piece with youth is really important. Like, it really, like, if you don't take anything away from everything that we talk about today, really like understand that you cannot have youth programming without actually actively engaging youth in all areas and in all processes of your programming. That's that.
Awesome. Kyla, did you want to add, or should we? I know that we have
there's a question specifically for Kyla, and I'm not sure you'll be able to address, but the question that's been asked is, this person works with Indigenous grandmas, and they're looking for ways, like the grandmas are looking for ways to engage with youth that are experiencing drug and alcohol issues. Is there, I know we don't have a lot of time, but is there some quick way that you could provide some tips for this person?
Yeah, quickly, I'll try to sum this up. As for reference, like this is something we've actually done as part of our programming, is that meeting youth where they're at also means like we are working with community partners, organizations, like whoever is willing to work with us, we will make something work. And so a lot of our programming is honestly through the local school. It's through the local high school, because we have so many young people coming from so many literal like rural communities, and they're centralized, 5 days a week. It's like, okay, we're going to meet you where you're at, and we are going to do the work that we need to do to support you. And if that means we are working with your teachers, we are working with the high school administrator, that we are working with the school board, we will do what we need to do to ensure that you are receiving our support as much as we possibly can. And part of that, the question that was asked was that, to answer it is, we've had a really awesome opportunity, and this was again pre-pandemic, where we had elders come in and sit in a day, like the Friday, every single week, at the high school, where we would invite them in, support their time, support their transportation, support food, and they would sit with the classes, 3 classes a day, and they would sit with them, and it would just literally be a time every Friday for those classes to sit, visit, have tea, share food, build relationships. That part of literally being present in community is so integral to the continuation of our work. That's, yeah, short and sweet.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for addressing that. And before we sort of wrap up, and again, this will be like rapid fire, if you can 30 seconds go around, but for folks who are online and maybe engaging in youth engagement work or community engagement work, can you, based on your experience, just give us some things not to do, things that may cause potential, I know, Monica, I know there's a long list, but if you can give us a few of, how to avoid perpetuating any harm or causing any harm to those you're serving.
I'll go really quickly because I'm like, ooh, we don't have enough time to get into that. So I'm going to say a positive and a negative. Please stop asking young people to do things for free. Please, please, please find the budget, redistribute a budget line or expenditure item. Like, we cannot be asking folks who have a number of intersections, experience food insecurity, housing insecurity, economic insecurity, to do these things for free. And then on that note, I think something that's been helpful for us as a team, we've been doing it for a while, but more so intensively over the last 4 years, wellness and wraparound support models. You know, having culturally anchored, services and supports that, employ Black and Indigenous knowledge practices when it comes to well-being and care. I think about this quote that Kim Catron spoke about, like, we show up to spaces, not as fractions, but as whole people. And we have different intersections, which means we have to think about those intersections when young people are coming into our spaces. So yes, it may be accessible by transport, by public transit, but, I don't have access to food. I'm in crisis. I don't have access to, let's say, one-on-one counseling. So a lot of the things that Black Women in Motion does is, what can we do, with what we have to alleviate barriers to access that are going to, again, honor and recognize people's humanity. So free one-on-one counseling, fresh food boxes, an internship once you graduate from the program, all of those other things that really take into account the poor social determinant of health outcomes that are very prevalent in Black and amongst Black and Indigenous young people. That's all.
I can go next. So I think the first thing that I'll say is check your biases and how it shows up in how you engage with youth. A lot of times our own internal conflicts actually stop us from being our true selves. So, be your own true self as well. Like, deal with your stuff as well, and not stop projecting. We want to, the other aspects too is that specifically when engaging with youth, I'll say girls, I'll speak specifically to girls, folks that identify as girls. One of the things that's really important is being mindful of the words that you say, especially as caregivers, so to speak, and as people that deal with youth. We don't understand the weight of our words, right? So a lot of times, I think Monica spoke on this a little, when they are at school, they're hearing a lot of things about themselves. They're hearing a lot of things that has been projected onto them. Your space of engagement should not be an extension of the education system or the societal systems. It should be a safe space. So being very mindful of the words that you're saying and being mindful of how you're engaging them and how you are integrating them into all the different aspects of the work that you're doing or the work that you're providing to them, I think is really imperative. And lastly, be yourself. Take care of yourself. As a caregiver and as a service provider, whatever it is that you have is what you're able to give. So when your cup is half full or when your cup is empty, you're going to start operating from a place of distress and from a place of tiredness and from a place of frustration. And the youth don't need all of that energy because they get that everywhere else that they go. So take care of you as well throughout that process.
Kyla, did you want to add one thing or?
Yeah, just very quickly to add on what has already been shared. I think the takeaway is that we have the opportunity to make systemic change within the organizations that we are part of. So that means reevaluating and revisiting the importance of compensating people fairly, young people, whether it's through honoraria, whether it's through staffing, what supports can you provide? For us, like I had said, like leading by example is a huge part of our work. And so it's often we're having these conversations with other organizations who are trying to figure out, hey, like we're going to hire young people for the summer as summer students, like what should we do? And then we can jump in and say, hey, this is our approach. These are our practices. We would like to help you and support you with this work because it is important. So I think networking, sharing resources across the sector is so important. But systemic change starts in our own homes. It starts in our own offices. It starts within our own organizations.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our panel. We've learned so much from you. Thank you, Muna, for moderating this conversation. Kyla, Aisha, Monica, for sharing your knowledge. Thank you to everyone who is still online. I know we're a little bit over. Thank you for joining us, and please stay tuned for other ONN opportunities. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.